Hi, I'm a Possum and I find garbage. Today's garbage is Snow White, Disney's latest tax write-off that spits on their own legacy. This is a remake of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the very first feature-length animated movie from back in 1937, and the movie that made Disney a household name. In other words, it was ground zero for all of my problems. Before I talk about the remake, let's get a little context. Little Snow White is a German fairy tale published by the Brothers Grimm in 1812. It starts with an evil queen asking a talking magic mirror who the most beautiful or fairest woman in the land is, and the mirror normally tells her she's the fairest of all. But one day, the mirror tells her that her stepdaughter Snow White is the fairest, so the evil queen becomes jealous and tells a huntsman to kill Snow White. But the huntsman can't bring himself to do so he tells Snow White to flee into the woods, where she meets 7 dwarfs living platonically in a one-bedroom cottage. And they let her stay with them because they need someone to cook and clean for them. No, really, that's the actual reason stated in the story. But when the evil queen finds out Snow White is still alive, she puts on various disguises and tries to kill her, but doesn't succeed until she tricks her into eating a poisoned apple. The dwarfs keep Snow White's body in an above-ground glass coffin until Prince shows up and says, "Hey, that's a pretty good-looking corpse you got there, can I have it?" Then the dwarfs say sure, and as they're picking her up, the piece of apple falls out of her mouth and she comes back to life. Then she and the prince get married and they force the evil queen to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she dies. All of this because a demon in a mirror told an insecure woman that an albino 7-year-old was hotter than her. Did I mention this story is German? So obviously Disney changed a lot for the film adaptation in 1937. They aged up Snow White to 14, the dwarfs are given names and personalities, Snow White is brought back to life by the prince kissing her, and they toned down the sadism. But they kept the basic story intact. Being the first feature-length animated film, the original Snow White is very simplistic and somewhat experimental. The story is not deep at all, which is to be expected because the fairy tale it's based on is only about 3,000 words long, and there's a 20-minute chunk that's just the dwarfs screwing around while no forward plot progression is being made. It seems to me that, more than anything, the movie was made as a showcase for the animation techniques of the time, some of which I'm not even sure how they would have done back in the days before computers. The movie shows not only what is possible with animation, but what's only possible with animation. Try getting real animals to do all this. This was an extremely ambitious movie for the time, and nothing like it existed before. It's not just the first animated movie, it's the first animated musical, and it came out in 1937, shortly after the end of the silent era. Synchronized sound was still a novelty, and this movie is animated characters singing. I mean, there were animated shorts that did that before, but nothing on this scale and with animation of this quality. Snow White was groundbreaking, and whatever you subjectively think of the movie, it is objectively an important piece of film and animation history. And that's why the very notion of remaking it in live action is such an insult. Just let me disclaim that I was never going to be fair to the remake, even if it was good, just because I'm philosophically opposed to the very notion of remaking an animated classic in live action, because the implication is that an animated movie can be improved upon by making it not animated anymore, which is an insult to animation as an art form and denigrates it as inferior to live action. And in this case, it's a remake of the very first feature-length animated movie. To anyone who actually cares about animation, Snow White is practically sacred, and here comes Disney, spitting on the movie that basically made their company. It's not even that the movie itself is the worst movie ever, but I hate what it represents. If the Lion King remake was the lid on the coffin for traditional animation, then the Snow White remake is the final nail. Now, I know there will be more 2D animated movies in the future, but they won't be from Disney, which used to be the biggest name in animation but has since become the art form's greatest enemy. And there's still plenty of other animated classics for Disney to ruin with remakes, so this isn't even the end of that trend. But this remake in particular is like a bookend. What started in 1937 with something new and groundbreaking which turned into a massive success and led to the proliferation of animation and gave children all over the world their favorite movies from multiple generations is now well and truly dead with one gigantic flop that embodies all the worst tendencies we've come to expect from the Disney slop factory. The remake is bloated, full of political pandering and nostalgia baiting, was made according to a marketing executive's checklist based on focus group testing, completely lacking in soul and substance while reeking of corporate meddling, and only exists to ride the coattails of what was made by smarter, more talented, and more moral people in a time that now seems long forgotten. It makes me sick. The only good thing about it is that it's flopping hard at the box office, but only after so many other remakes of animated classics have been so profitable until now. That gives me some small hope that maybe Disney will stop, but I'm not counting on it. This corporation is so creatively bankrupt that repackaging and reselling the old successes is all they can do now. This movie had a lot of controversy working against it even before the first trailer came out, most of it centering around the star Rachel Zegler. Now, if there's any character in the world who shouldn't be race-swapped, it's the one who's literally named after the fact that she has white skin. But evidently, Disney was so committed to the race swap, it was just so important to them, that they actually changed the meaning behind her name. In this version, her parents named her Snow White because she was born in a carriage that got stuck in a snowstorm. Yeah, really. What would they have called her if it was a sandstorm? Dry Brown? So Rachel Zegler is a hard 6, just like me. So you might be wondering how she can be called the fairest of them all, and make a woman who looks like Gal Gadot jealous of her. Well, it turns out Snow White is the fairest because her kindness makes her the most beautiful on the inside. The problem with this is it doesn't make any sense because if the mirror is judging by inner beauty, then the evil queen should be in last place instead of second. Maybe she and Snow White are the only two people in the kingdom who don't have a vouch folder on their hard drives. What? And it doesn't help that Rachel Zegler seems hell-bent on making herself the least likable actress since Brie Larson by saying stupid things in interviews and denigrating the original movie.
The cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power.
There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Yeah. Weird.
And making, let's just say, not very princessy comments about the 2024 election, which she had to apologize for, and I'm sure she only did because Disney forced her to. Hey, remember how Gina Carano got fired from The Mandalorian for less than that? Reportedly, there's also a lot of behind-the-scenes drama between her and Gal Gadot, who's from Israel and once served in the IDF. You can guess how Twitter reacted to her getting the role. It turns out Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot have some differences of opinion regarding a certain conflict overseas. And if you've seen how people talk about that conflict on Twitter, you can imagine the environment that's created on set, outside of the interviews where actors always do that thing where they pretend to be best friends. You might notice how few public appearances they made together after a certain event that happened in October of 2023, which I'm sure YouTube's demonetization bots don't want me talking about. Almost like Disney was trying to keep them separated, and how they seem to avoid making eye contact while presenting at the Oscars earlier this year. Disney even scaled back the premiere of the movie, probably to avoid controversy. So I guess Disney suddenly became adverse to politics after spending the past decade injecting progressivism into everything they make, including this movie. By the way, you know that song Snow White sings at the well at the beginning of the movie? The one about waiting for a true love to come find her? Well, that's not in the remake. We don't even get a remix of it. This is probably because it's current year and you're not allowed to make a movie about a woman falling in love with a man, or a woman being rescued by a man anymore, because that's patriarchal. You're only allowed to make movies about girl bosses now.
I just mean that it's no longer 1937. She's not going to be safe with a prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be.
Well, I guess Rachel Zegler girl-bossed a little too close to the sun because some old white man in a suit who has power and authority over her told her to shut that giant mouth of hers before the premiere. Snow White does actually end up falling in love with a man and getting brought back to life by him kissing her in the movie, so I guess after losing a ton of money on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, The Marvels, and Wish, they decide the whole girl boss thing just wasn't doing it and brought back the romance and reshoots.
She's not going to be safe with a prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
Speaking of reshoots, rumors say the movie had poor reactions from test audiences, so Disney reshot huge chunks of the movie to add CGI dwarfs, film a prologue to help soften the character of Snow White because people hated her, and tone down the feminism. These reshoots ballooned the budget to nearly $400 million. Even the more conservative estimates I've seen say they blew through $300 million. The reshoots also ended up delaying the release of the movie by 2 years. Did they reshoot the entire thing? After all that, the movie ended up being a huge flop, grossing only $43 million at the domestic box office on its opening weekend. As of the time of this video, we still don't know how bad it's gonna be, but Disney is expected to lose between $100 and $200 million. I hope there's some pennies at the bottom of the wishing well. Then there was the reimagining of the dwarfs. An early production photo revealed they replaced the dwarfs with a diverse ensemble of humans, and when the response was predictably overwhelmingly negative, they did a bunch of reshoots and put the dwarves back in. But they couldn't be real dwarf actors because Peter Dinklage pulled up the step stool behind him, so now there's CGI dwarfs that look like the trolls from Ernest Scared Stupid. The humans are still in the movie though, playing a group of bandits. I guess Disney didn't want to get sued for breach of contract, but these changes required rewrites and reshoots, and the addition of the CGI dwarfs alone probably cost enough money that they could have made a whole other movie. At what point do you just say screw it and cut your losses instead of spending millions of dollars trying to fix a bad movie and hoping in vain that you make the money back? They could have just released it as it was 2 years ago, let it flop, and then wrote it off on their taxes and spent all the money they used for the reshoots on a bunch of smaller projects. But that would have required them to do something new and creative, and that just isn't Disney's brand anymore. Since we're on the topic of the dwarfs, they decide to make Dopey the most prominent dwarf for some reason, and he isn't dumb in this movie. He acts dumb, but then we find out he's not actually dumb, he just refuses to talk because he has social anxiety or something, and this makes the other dwarfs think he's dumb, and they make fun of him and bully him. I mean, he acts like a clumsy idiot and holds his pickaxe backwards when we see him in the mine at the beginning, but then the movie tells us he's not dumb later on, so I guess he just acts dumb for no in-universe reason when the movie needs him to, kind of like how the writing is only bad when the movie needs it to be, which happens to be most of the time. The climax of the original movie had the dwarfs chasing the evil queen after she tricked Snow White into eating the poisoned apple, and this led to her trying to crush them with a boulder, but she ended up falling off a cliff and getting crushed herself, dying a karmic death. It might seem weird that the protagonist wasn't there to defeat the villain, but the dwarfs fighting for Snow White is supposed to show how much they've come to love her after all the kindness she showed them, and how the evil queen caused her own downfall. In the remake, the dwarfs don't do anything during the climax. Neither do the bandits for the most part, or any of the other characters we're introduced to. Snow White just walks up to the castle, the people of the town follow her, and it looks like she's about to lead them in a revolt, but that would be out of character, so instead she just convinces the castle guards to turn against the queen, who then runs off and smashes the magic mirror in a fit of rage and gets sucked into it. The bandits show up and one of them shoots a dagger out of the queen's hand with a crossbow, but that's about it. I don't remember the dwarfs even being there. It's weird because typically when you introduce a bunch of characters who each have their own traits and abilities, you expect them to all work together and use those abilities during the big showdown with the bad guy. Even that flop Wish had the other characters help out at the end, where they did that big heist to break into the bad guy's castle. But the Snow White remake introduces 7 new characters on top of the 7 dwarfs it already had, and doesn't do anything with these characters in the end. Some of the bandits I don't even remember having any lines throughout the whole movie. Why even have these characters? The whole thing with the bandits just adds convolution to the story. Like, it wasn't enough for Snow White to run into one group of weirdos in the woods. They had to add the Aldi store brand imitation Robin Hood and his merry people. Let's talk about the plot. The movie starts with Snow White being born to her king and queen in a carriage during a blizzard because a woman who was 9 months pregnant irresponsibly decided to go on a long carriage ride during the winter. Then Snow White's mom dies, and then the king gets married to an evil gold digger who becomes the new queen, and she tells him there's an invasion or something going on, so instead of consulting his generals or whatever, he just goes off to fight this war on her say-so alone and never returns. We find out later that the evil queen had him killed somehow. Years later, the evil queen has Snow White working in the kitchen, and some guy breaks in and steals potatoes because Hollywood doesn't know that potatoes didn't exist in medieval Europe because they're a New World vegetable. Bandit Guy tells Snow White that people are starving, so she goes to the evil queen to complain, and then Bandit Guy gets arrested. Snow White manages to convince the evil queen to not have Bandit Guy executed, so she instead has him tied to the gate of the castle for the town to see. But then the evil queen sees Snow White freeing him, so she asks the magic mirror who the fairest in the land is, and it tells her it's Snow White. So she tells the huntsman to kill Snow White, so he follows her to an orchard and is about to kill her, but then decides not to and tells her to run. Snow White flees into the woods where she gets attacked by animated trees, which is weird because I always interpreted that scene in the original as her imagination. But the trees actually grab her and rip her cloak off, so I guess they're just actually monster trees now. Anyway, she falls into a pond and then a whimsical CGI deer leads her to the dwarf's cabin where she breaks in and immediately falls asleep on their beds in her wet clothes. Sometime later, the dwarfs finish working in the mine and come home and find Snow White sleeping in their beds, and they decide to let her stay. The next morning, the dwarfs have a food fight at breakfast and end up trashing the house, and they all pick on Dopey, so he goes outside. Snow White follows him and teaches him to whistle since he can't talk, and then she tells the dwarfs what to do in their own house and makes them clean up. Meanwhile, the evil queen has the huntsman thrown into a dungeon for sparing Snow White, and sends her henchmen to find her. Snow White screws around in the woods and runs into Bandit Guy again, and it turns out he and his bandit friends are exiles who are loyal to the king. The queen's henchmen show up and Bandit Guy jumps into the path of a crossbow bolt fired at Snow White, so Snow White takes Bandit Guy to the dwarfs and has Doc surgically remove the bolt despite his total lack of medical knowledge. And then Bandit Guy is instantly totally fine. The movie doesn't even take the opportunity to show him bandaged up with his shirt off for the 90% female audience. The dwarfs and the bandits all celebrate, and Snow White and Bandit Guy fall in love. Bandit Guy then leaves to go find the king, I guess because he never thought to do that in all these years until now, and ends up getting captured by the evil queen's guards and gets thrown into a dungeon with the huntsman. The evil queen then disguises herself as an old hag and makes a magical poisoned apple. The queen goes to the dwarf's cottage, I guess because she was able to find it when her guards couldn't, and tricks Snow White into eating the apple, killing her. The evil queen leaves, then the dwarfs find Snow White's body. Back in the dungeon, Bandit Guy and the huntsman escape, not by doing anything smart or clever, but by just pulling on the chains until they break. The huntsman had been locked up with minimal food and water for maybe 3 days by this point, but he still had the strength to break an iron chain. Bandit Guy then goes to find Snow White and she's already dead, and the dwarfs have her laying on a fiberglass rock because they could spend millions of dollars on reshoots but couldn't spring for a glass coffin. He kisses Snow White, breaking the curse, and she comes back to life, and they decide to go overthrow the evil queen. Also, Dopey talks in this scene, but I don't remember what he says. Snow White goes back to the castle and has all the townspeople follow her for no particular reason other than because the movie needs them to witness her convincing the guards to turn against the evil queen, who then runs inside and smashes the magic mirror, causing her to get sucked in and presumably dies. Then the movie ends on a big Shrek-style song and dance number. I'm not kidding. I guess I should talk about the music really briefly. To give credit, Rachel Zegler actually can sing, unlike Emma Watson in the Beauty and the Beast remake, which she was obviously auto-tuned. That's about the only nice thing I have to say about the songs because I don't even remember most of them. Much like the Lion King remake, the songs lack interesting visuals and mostly consist of actors just standing or walking around. The only songs that have creative visuals are the ones with the dwarfs, which are fully animated characters, so you can do anything with them. Maybe that's a good reason to not turn an animated movie in which you can do anything you can imagine into a live-action remake, only to end up having to make the movie 90% CGI anyway. Here's an idea. How about instead of having the queen trick the king into going off to fight a fake war so she can murder him and take over the kingdom, and removing the prince from the story and replacing him with a bandit, how about you make the war real, have the king get killed in battle, then have the evil queen take over and win the war and overthrow the royal family of the rival kingdom, forcing the prince to flee into exile. This would add a layer of depth to the evil queen because then she could argue that she saved the kingdom and everyone owes her their lives. You can have the element of the people from two rival kingdoms hating each other, and their meanness toward each other would contrast with Snow White's kindness and strengthen the theme. And Snow White can meet the exiled enemy prince in the woods and win him over with kindness since that's her thing, and they fall in love. But then he can't stay with her for whatever reason and he has to leave her with the dwarfs, so he comes back after the poisoned apple incident and revives her with his magic kiss or whatever. Then after the evil queen is defeated by the dwarfs, the two kingdoms become united not by conquest, but by love, and it can be a big happy fairy tale ending. There you go, Disney, I just rewrote your entire movie for you, and it didn't cost $100 million or take 2 years. So that's all I have to say about the Snow White remake. Now I have a challenge for my audience. In the comments below, ask a question you've always wanted to ask the opposite sex, and answer each other's questions. Maybe some of you boys could get answers from the 12 or so girls who follow me. And don't forget to subscribe, check my channel for other videos you may have missed since YouTube doesn't always tell you when I upload, leave a comment for the algorithm, and send me your fan art and support me on Patreon. The links are in the pinned comment. Bye.